Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're plunging straight into a grim, dark fable about the absolute terror of control and why reality always comes back with a vengeance. We're talking Nietzschean concepts, we're talking philology. It's a deep dive into the clash between the sterile, obsessive hunt for perfection and the messy, pulsing, vital essence of actual life. We'll be looking at these Gothic metaphors, parables of figures who tried to calculate their way into godhood, only to build themselves a nightmare. Let's get right into it and see what these dark tales reveal about our own psychological wiring.
Now, the Pale Inquisitor really hits the nail on the head here. This quote perfectly frames the core tragedy we're unpacking today. It's that desperate, very human urge to just escape. Escaping the chaos, the pain, the sheer unpredictability of life by literally trying to erase it. We usually think of optimization and control as good things, right? But in this fable, the messy pulse of being, our blood, our hunger, our primal unconscious, is traded away for what he calls an optimized eternity of nothingness. It is the absolute ultimate ego trip. You try to wash your hands of the dirt of existence, totally detaching yourself. And sure, you might successfully save yourself from life, but the cost? You end up as nothing more than a smiling corpse locked in a windowless room. So, to really grasp just how disastrous this obsession gets, we have to talk about two key concepts: high time and shattered apotheosis. First off, high time. This is definitely not a celebration. It's a state of terminal stasis. It is the exact freezing moment when the fist of control, what the fable calls the Phausian fist, clenches so incredibly tight that it just crushes the anima. It literally suffocates the vital spirit of life. And what inevitably follows that? A shattered apotheosis. These figures actually convince themselves they're ascending to divinity. But the reality? It's just the final stage of a rigid, digital decay. It's psychic death by calculation, entirely masquerading as a triumph.
Let's look at how this actually plays out chronologically. Take the parable of the summit of Marbledest. We follow this figure called the Last Man, and this guy spends his entire existence hauling heavy cargo, specifically the massive marble blocks of societal duty, day in, day out, piling them up into this towering mountain, all for this promised hour of absolute perfect purity. Fast forward to day 10,000. He finally reaches the summit. The momentum is peaking, the calculation is flawless, and boom, the final hour is here. But at the exact stroke of high time, it hits him. This mountain isn't a throne, it's a static monument. It's literally a giant gravestone he built for himself while he was still breathing. Because his whole life was structured around denying the dirt, he has absolutely zero internal substance. So when the cold, wild wind of reality finally blows against his rigid, perfect form, he just shatters, instantly, reduced to a cloud of iron and salt blowing in the wind.
And honestly, that beautifully, terrifyingly illustrates the shared pathology across all the parables we're looking at. Whether it's the astronomer, the ruler, or the high priest, their absolute obsession with avoiding the messy vulnerabilities of life just traps them in a clockwork abyss of their own design. Think about it. The astronomer wants to map absolute data, but he ends up trapped in a windowless void of records. The ruler, he wants absolute sovereignty, but he just gets paralyzed by the exact time he managed to master. And then you have the high priest, trying to announce his own divinity, but his entire city just becomes a laboratory of nothingness. Why? Because a bell with no blood has no voice to announce the messy pulse of being.
Okay, let's zoom in on the astronomer's journey step by step, because this perfectly shows how this self-destruction actually operates. He kicks things off by obsessively trying to map the star of high time. But the guy literally cannot handle a single imperfection, so he becomes this dark, cosmic scribe. He takes a razor-sharp quill and starts covering up any hidden stain of human vulnerability with pitch-black ink. He is literally writing with reality itself, following the creed of negation, erasing reality just to serve the void. In his quest for perfect purity, he systematically deletes the actual light of existence. And the crazy part? When he finally looks up, expecting to see the glorious heavens, he doesn't. He's met face-to-face with this terrifying living inkblot of negation. He literally wrote his own void into existence.
We see a strikingly similar, incredibly tragic origin story deep in the Dark Tower of the ruler, the Clockwork Sovereign. This guy wanted absolute control so badly that he replaced his own blood that actually feels the painful reality of change, with gears of perfect data. He forged a halo of clock-hand arrows just to pin the wind of life down to one single frozen moment. But of course, this halo is nothing but a self-imposed prison of frozen moments. By achieving his perfect, rigid, digital decay, he paralyzed himself. He became the most expensive clock in an empty room. But here is where it gets absolutely fascinating. Right there, deep in the dark origin of the Sovereign's Tower, completely paralyzed by that same inkblot of negation, something stirs. Deep within the hollowed-out remains of this sterile ego, a vital spirit, the Jester starts waking up.
The Pale Inquisitor diagnoses exactly what caused the Sovereign's massive downfall, and it is brutally accurate. That Faustian fist of control? Sure, it might feel like power, it might look like ultimate sovereignty on the outside, but fundamentally, it's just a defensive reflex. It is a tightly clenched fist wrapped around absolutely nothing, a void. The Inquisitor points out the brutal irony of this so-called shattered purity. The more you use that razor-sharp quill to blot out your own shadow, the more you hide from your vulnerabilities, the more you guarantee your own psychic death. It is a life that has quite literally never been lived, all because the ego was just too terrified of the dirt.
And this perfectly sets up the central conflict of our fable. We have to contrast these two wildly different types of judgment. On one side, you have the sterile, erasing quill of the Pale Inquisitor, the ultimate tool of the ego, desperately trying to carve out laws and achieve perfect purity. And on the other side, the Monster Inquisitor's rusted hook. This is such a dramatic, symbolic shift. We are moving completely away from that obsession with sterile, digital perfection and being dragged into a chaotic, terrifying, but completely necessary grounding in reality.
The Monster Inquisitor doesn't wield this rusted hook to enforce purity. No way. He wields it to execute what's called the Inquisition of the Real. This is an absolutely crucial concept. The Inquisition of the Real is the brutal, necessary process of tearing down that sterile, windowless room the ego built for itself. It acts as an unapologetic, violent judge that drags the shadow back into the light. It brings back the very dirt and hunger that form the actual foundation of our identity. It forcefully shatters that static monument so the cold, wild wind of reality can rush back into the psyche and finally liberate it.
So how exactly does this terrifying tool actually save us from terminal stasis? Well, it essentially performs a philological archaeology of terror. Think of a scholar trying to muffle their primal animal nature behind dead languages and artificial certainties. The hook physically rips that away to expose the growling of the belly underneath. It hooks the tongue of anyone spouting sterile, pure thoughts and strips away those silk robes of denial. It literally forces you to display your hunger on the outside for everyone to see. Instead of feeding you the pink syrup of false redemption that disconnects you from the world, the rusted hook anchors you directly to your own rot. It anchors you to the beautiful, messy biological truth of exactly who you are.
Which brings us to the ultimate psychological climax of our fable, the violent return of the repressed. Remember the jester fool trapped inside the Sovereign's hollowed remains? This is where he finally breaks free. He has the one thing the Sovereign completely lacked, the courage to actually display hunger, completely unearthing that primal reality the ego had desperately shoved under the floorboards. The jester totally rejects that Faustian fist, that anxious defensive reflex of clenching for control. Instead, he embraces the true root of the fool, the phallus, which literally translates to the empty bellows. By finally unburdening himself of all that heavy cargo of perfection, the jester lets out this massive, guttural human laugh. And because he is finally empty, that cold, wild wind of reality can howl right through his chambers. This surge of life acts as a flute for the unconscious. It plays this chaotic, primal melody that the rigid, calculated structures of the halo simply cannot withstand. The laughter absolutely shatters the frozen halo. It shatters the inkblot of negation. It completely ends the terminal stasis. By embracing this violent return of reality, the jester reclaims his psychic buoyancy. He is finally free to float on the vibrant, chaotic waves of change, while the heavy, rigid structures of the Sovereign's calculation are just swallowed by the void.
So, I want to leave you with this. Take a hard look at the structures you're building in your own life. When you strive for ultimate optimization, flawless execution, and absolute control, are you truly mastering your time? Or are you, just like the last man in the Clockwork Sovereign, clutching a Faustian fist around a void? Are you just building a static, windowless monument to hide from the dirt, the hunger, and the beautifully messy pulse of being alive? It's a terrifying question for sure, but acknowledging it might just be the rusted hook you need to finally let that wild wind of reality back in.